Okay, so I've been covering the practical aspects of graduated exposure. I've not got into the psychology behind it. So if you're thinking, Mike, I'm no way ready to go to a toilet and stand at a urinal even if I don't need to pee, stick with me. I'm going to go over the psychology behind it, which is going to help. So just to segue into that, we're going to be talking about the ego. And whenever I talk about this, I'm always reminded of a movie called Revolver. Now, it's a somewhat violent movie, but I would recommend you watch it, if anything, just for educational purposes. There's a scene within that movie where the lead character is told to go where he doesn't want to go. Now, he suffers from claustrophobia, so he doesn't like being in elevators. And he's told, go where you don't want to go and you'll find him there. And he doesn't know what they mean. Find him there. Find who? Well, they were referring to the ego. And the ego is that dialogue in the head. It's how we talk to ourselves. And because it's in our dialogue, we think it's us, but it's the ego. And it is us, you know, the ego, it is an aspect of us. But we can observe it with awareness. And when we observe it with awareness, it doesn't have the same hold over us. It doesn't have the same grip over us. So in that movie, he decides to go where he doesn't want to go, which is what we're doing now with the graduated exposure. And he goes into the elevator and he confronts his own ego. So the difference now is, in the same way as the lead character in that movie, we're facing it of our own accord. Whereas before we were avoiding it at all costs, now we're actually deliberately putting ourselves in situations where we feel uncomfortable. And because we're deliberately doing that, it has a disarming effect on the paruresis. It weakens it. It takes away some of its power. It's like, have you ever experienced walking in public and you trip up and you try to make it look like you intended to do that? Because if it's something that you intended to do, it's like, well, I intended to do that anyway. Whereas when we didn't intend to do it and we feel foolish, you know, we feel it deeper. It feels all the more uncomfortable because it was something that was imposed upon us that we didn't want to happen. But if we set out to do that deliberately, it's like, well, I intended for that to happen. It doesn't have that same power over you. So graduated exposure is a great way to become familiar with your own neurosis. So it's going to allow you to get to know yourself and to get to know your paruresis. Imagine it's like walking through a hallway, and as you walk through that hallway, there are trapdoors and snares that are there to stop you along the way. So you got to walk the hallway in order to know where those trapdoors are. And when I say trapdoors, I mean your own coping behaviour. We have coping behaviours around paruresis, just little things like walking to the toilets, but keeping one eye on who might be following you, keeping an eye out to see if your friend is going to follow you, and whether that's going to mean you're going to back out of the situation. So it gets you familiar with the coping behaviours, but with graduated exposure, we're walking through that hallway with awareness. So we're looking to see, how do I talk to myself? What's my inner dialogue like whilst I'm doing this? So it's a great way to get familiar with it. And at first, you know, it's going to feel like a job. for me, when I was meeting up with people for coffee and saying yes to all the social events I could, at the time it did feel like a job. And although other people are at the social event for the fun of it, I'm kind of there, not so much for the fun of it, but I'm there because I want to get exposure. But after a while, I was going out not to get exposure. I was going out to enjoy it, like everyone else. Going out to a restaurant because I want to enjoy a meal with my friends, and exposure wasn't the be-all and end-all. I got to a point where it was great. I could go out because I want to enjoy a night out, and I also get an opportunity to get some exposure. I get an opportunity to stay on top of this. I actually discovered, on the extrovert-introvert scale, I lean more onto the introvert side of things, but I actually discovered, I actually do enjoy being out in public, enjoying good company. And I had aspirations at the time to meet the right partner. That was one of the things that motivated me, because I'd become a little bit of a recluse, and I wanted to meet the right girl, and I knew if I'm going to meet the right girl, and if I want to be able to have a dinner with her and her family without worrying, without being a nervous wreck, I've got to do this, and I've got to get out there and get exposure. And at first it was like a job, but then it became an enjoyment. So that's what we're doing. It gives us an opportunity to confront the ego and to become familiar with that and befriend the ego. My approach isn't to demonize the ego. The ego is, this is born out of fear. So it's there to keep you safe. So the ego believes that it's doing a good thing, that it's serving you. And so we want to show it that, okay, I understand you're doing this to help me, but there's another way. There's a way that we can move forwards here, and it's going to be better for both of us. I'm just touching on that briefly here. I'm going to get into that in more detail. Hope you got something from this. Catch you on the next video.